Hey there, everybody. I'm sorry for that little delay. I had a little issue with my timer, but here I am today. Thank you for joining us. Um, Today, I really wanted to go over something really important that is crucial to the work that Aaron and I do, which is we want to go over and discuss the work of the late Dr. Weston A. Price. Before we get started, a word about one of our most favorite products of all, which is Green Pasture Products fermented cod liver oil. Green Pasture Products is a company of great integrity and a company that is completely dedicated just to helping all of us to have the nutrients that our bodies need to build health, maintain health, and regain health. Fermented cod liver oil is something that goes back thousands of years to Scandinavia. Cod liver oil in and of itself is an excellent product, but when fermented, the nutrient profile increases dramatically, in particular, the vitamin D content and the range of vitamin D. Now, while there are lots of cod liver oil products on the market, again, this product is fermented, so it's extra powerful. But besides that, what sets Green Pasture Products apart from all of the others on the market, almost all, there are two others that are okay that I would use from time to time. But this particular product is very pure, very clean. The cod livers are harvested primarily from the Bering Sea, from the North Atlantic, frozen and then brought to the facility here in the U.S. where Green Pasture Products thaws those livers in vats and inoculates them with lactobacilli and other organisms and allows the livers to ferment. Now, it's not that the oil itself ferments, but the livers ferment. And in so doing, again, that fermentation process produces a wider range of nutrients that are very important to our health. But it's also pure, unadulterated, unlike other cod liver oil products on the market that have been molecularly distilled, even heat treated, and deconstructed. We want the whole food, as with everything else. We want the whole product. And you've heard me say it a million times. I'm not into supplements per se. There are very few supplements that I even consider taking. Occasionally, there is a role for supplements, but this is not a supplement. This is food. So Green Pasture Products comes in a variety of flavors and forms. What you see on the screen is fermented cod liver oil blended with butter oil. Dr. Price in his research saw that by combining the butter oil from naturally raised pastured animals with the liver, the cod liver oil, the two pieces work synergistically to create a very dynamic product. So Green Pasture Products has a variety of forms of cod liver oil, all fermented, including just this basic cod liver, which is what I use. And actually, I even put it in my skincare. The straight cod liver oil comes in bottles like this and a syringe. I'm missing the syringe from this bottle, but the syringe makes it easy to have your daily dose. And I do mean daily. I take this every single day. It also comes in capsules, and this is actually skate oil, which is different than cod liver oil. But the premise is the same. The process is the same. This may be more helpful for people who have joint issues, which is why the skate oil has been developed. Okay, that aside, Green Pasture Products is my biggest recommendation for any kind of supplementation per se whatsoever. And it's something that I just can't stress enough the importance of. Okay, so we're going to get rolling with the work of Dr. Weston A. Price. Dr. Price was a very intelligent and curious man who lived at a very interesting time in human history, that being the first part of the 20th century. He was born in the latter part of the 19th century, but he practiced in the early 20th century. Now, being a curious fellow and very astute, he was noticing a couple of things in his patients. He was noticing that their dental health was deteriorating. He was seeing more cavitation and also younger people coming in with what we call malocclusions, which means a narrow palate that doesn't allow enough room for all of the teeth to come in straight, and certainly doesn't allow for wisdom teeth. But in noticing these changes in the first part of the 20th century again, he put two and two together. He realized that the food supply was changing dramatically at that point in time. And he surmised that food must have something to do with why his patients' dental as well as physical health was declining, because he also did notice a decline in overall bodily health. It wasn't just the teeth, but as a dentist, he realized that the teeth were like the window into the rest of the body. So, being the curious man that he was and living at a very interesting time in human history, he decided that he would travel the world seeking indigenous cultures to examine their overall health, beginning, though, with their dental health. And then he wanted to see what kinds of foods that these indigenous cultures were eating when, again, he's seeking indigenous cultures, and these are cultures that were only consuming their native diets. Now, why is this important? Again, he sees that what we eat must have something to do with physical bodily health. And so I oftentimes ask people this weird question, and if you've paid any attention to some of our videos over the last several months, you will have heard me say, "Why do you eat?" And it seems like such a strange question, but essentially this is the question that needs to be asked and that Dr. Price was seeking the answer to. So, do we eat just because we're hungry? Do we eat very intentionally, though, because we understand that food has something to do with health? Do we eat because we enjoy the flavors of food? And I would say that for me, and I would hope for all of you, that the answer is all of the above. So most people today, as I'm observing, most people today are quite happy to just fill their belly to stave off hunger without even giving a thought to what the foods that they're eating have to do with their physical health and emotional mental health, I might add. But again, Dr. Price lived at this really interesting time when the food system was changing. He could still seek out indigenous cultures. He was able to travel around the world, which was a new thing. It was very difficult to travel, especially for a common person prior to this point in time. And another interesting thing about that point in history was that he also had the use of cameras. He even was able to take video footage of some of the people that he visited. So all of these things coming together formed the perfect environment for Dr. Price to explore. So the first people that he visited were the Swiss people of the Lochenstall Valley in Switzerland. He and his wife, Frances, traveled there with their cameras and crew. And in this isolated valley, they found people with vibrant health. Now, in order to reach these people, you had to follow footpaths through mountain passes and haul in supplies. The reason why this is important is that these people were not yet influenced and touched by commercial foods, what Dr. Price described as the foods of modern commerce. This is important because it meant that these people were eating only their native diets. Now, the Swiss people in this isolated valley ate things like sourdough rye bread that was fermented sometimes for days. They ate butter and cheese and yogurt from their dairy cows, which spent the summers in the mountains eating wonderful herbs and grasses as they were growing rapidly, which is important because rapidly growing grasses contain extra nutrients that dry forage, for instance, does not contain, and that midsummer season, when it's a little bit warmer, there's not quite as much of these factors. The Wolzogen factor, which is an anti-stiffness, anti-joint stiffness factor, which Dr. Price identified. The fat-soluble activators were more vibrant, and there were many, many nutrients from the herbs and grasses that these cows were grazing on that put those phytonutrients into the milk. And so when these people were harvesting the milk from their dairy animals, they were turning it into cheese, and they were turning it into butter and other food products, including products that they would store, such as cheese, into the winter months when the cows were dry. When they came down from the hills, they were bred and they were given the winter's rest to produce healthy offspring. So these people also did eat other animal foods, but key and foundational foods in their diet were their sourdough bread and their fermented and cultured and raw dairy products. Now, this picture, actually these two pictures, are of two children from that valley. Dr. Price, again, looks at the teeth first because he's a dentist and he understands the connection between oral health and physical bodily health. What he found was near perfection. Very, very seldom a cavitation. If so, it was tiny. These people had straight teeth. Their palates were broad, so there was plenty of room for all of their teeth to come in properly. They weren't losing teeth. Teeth were not decaying away. They had strong teeth. Now, he did note something about there being a slime across their teeth, which was more of, I think, a natural protective slime that the body produced. But bear in mind, these people had not only never seen a dentist before, but they also had never seen a toothbrush. So for them to have such beautiful teeth is a true testament to their diet. Because going back to why do we eat? The foundational reason for why we eat is to build, rebuild, and maintain healthy, strong bodies. And Dr. Price could see that the diet that these people in the Lohkenstall Valley were consuming was a diet that was abundant in the nutrients that they needed in order to be healthy and strong. Now, there was a lot more to it than even just their oral and physical health. These people were happy people. They were hardworking. They lived long. They died of old age, not of disease. And they didn't have all of the problems, not just physical, but also the societal problems that we have today that are, I believe, largely a result of very poor diets. Dr. Price also visited 3 groups of people in Africa, and just as in the Lohkenstall Valley, he found these beautiful smiles, these beautiful wide faces, wide palates, and beautiful health. No matter where he went, whether it be, as in this example, Alaska, the last Africa, or Europe, He went to Scotland, to the Outer Hebrides Islands. He went to South America. He went to, you'll see in a moment, he went to visit the Seminole Indians of Florida. Where didn't he go? He was in Polynesia, he was in Australia, but he kept finding the same thing over and over everywhere he went. And that is that people that are only consuming their traditional diets were vibrantly healthy. Look at this beautiful mama and her baby in Alaska. And they were not eating donuts. They weren't eating Rice Krispies for breakfast. They weren't eating jams and jellies loaded with sugar. And actually, they weren't eating a lot of the things that I personally choose to eat to build my health. They were eating actually what was appropriate for where they lived. And this is key. We're going to come back to that. But the sad thing is that once these people started consuming what Dr. Price called, again, the foods of modern commerce, immediately their oral health began to decline. There began to be cavitations, sometimes so badly that teeth had to be pulled. Children were born with crowded teeth, and they consequently began to experience negative physical, bodily effects from just the simple fact that their nutrient-rich foods were being replaced with depleted foods, with foods that were devitalized, foods that were full of sugar, but not the nutrients that the body needs. And so immediately people would begin to see a decline in their physical health, beginning with their oral health. Here's an example of two young men. The one on the left is a vibrantly healthy young Polynesian man. The photo on the right is from the same group of people from the same area, but this young man had begun to be fed devitalized modern foods. Now, these modern foods are much different than what we have now. So their version of modern foods and what was appealing to them was that foods that were sugary, canned vegetables instead of fresh or fermented, white bread instead of whole bread, whole grains, and also they weren't fermented as they had previously been. So just with those few changes, everything began to change with personal health. So here is just an excellent side-by-side illustration of that. Here are photos that Dr. Price took of the Native Americans in Florida. On the left, of course, you see those who are consuming their traditional diets, and on the right, those who have abandoned their whole natural food diets. And they're definitely suffering from oral decline, aren't they? But the thing is that when you replace the good nutrient-rich foods that our traditional peoples ate, what I say are God-given foods, when you replace them with foods coming from factories instead of farms, from processing plants instead of the oceans and the forests, you're going to have an almost immediate decline in physical health. And the vitality of these people decreases generation after generation after generation. So we begin to see problems like there's little resistance to disease, for instance. Children are born with nutrient deficiencies. Fertility goes down. people begin to suffer immediately. Now, in our modern world today, people have dentists. So you have a cavity, maybe you have a bunch of cavities. I had a lot of cavities growing up because my mother fed us by clipping coupons and using the microwave oven. Therefore, my family's diet was severely nutrient deficient. And I can see it in my mouth. I can see it in the faces of some of my siblings. Thankfully, I didn't suffer fertility problems, but I did kind of personally figure out that we needed better foods as a young adult. And so I began to feed myself as a young adult a far better diet. And as I've learned more over the years, obviously my diet has gotten better and better and better. But just even looking at photos of my mother, she had a very narrow face. She had to have teeth pulled because there wasn't enough room in her mouth for wisdom teeth. Although I'm not so sure that my mother actually had wisdom teeth. I don't, and I know my grandmother did not. But, my mom did what she thought was the best that she could do for us. She was being mindful of the family budget. She was trying to stretch the family's grocery dollars as much as possible. My father and I gardened together every summer, and I think that may have helped prevent further decline. But we canned everything, which meant that we destroyed most of the nutrients from the good produce even that we grew. It's really sad because today, of course, the common diet is almost totally devoid of nutrients. And so we now have fertility problems, a lot of oral health problems. We have disease, we have cancer because of toxicity and lack of good nutrition. We have so many problems, and almost all of it relates back to the food that we're choosing to consume or that we're giving to our families. Erin and I want to change that, and that's why Dr. Price's work is important to us, and that's why we've started God's Good Table. Most of my kids, when they were in high school, we homeschooled, and I made them read Dr. Price's pivotal seminal work, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. We have this on our resource list. It is a highly recommended book. I just can't recommend it enough. Dr. Price discovered in looking at the foods that people ate that there were common denominators, even though he visited people from Alaska to Australia and even all over Africa. The diets varied greatly, and yet these people were vibrantly healthy, again, consuming just their native diets. So that with the diets varying according to region, there still were common denominators. And some of the most important of those are the very things that we vilify today. But before I switch to that, I just want to show you just a little bit of his book. Again, I mentioned that Dr. Price lived at such an interesting time where he had the ability to travel. He had the ability to go and visit people all over the world because he could jump on a steamship and go to another continent. And he could take photographs to document what he was seeing. But then he looked at the food of all of these people, and again, varied diets. For instance, in Africa, he visited 3 distinct people groups. One were the Maasai, who are still 7 feet tall and vibrantly healthy. He visited a group of people that we might call the pygmies, at least when I was growing up, that's what we referred to them as. They were much shorter in stature, but they were very healthy. They had very little tooth decay. There was a tiny amount of cavitation, but they didn't have fertility problems and all of that. And they were highly resistant to disease. And then he also visited another group of people that was also vibrantly healthy and more average in weight and average in everything else. I meant to say height. The difference between the Maasai and the Pygmies were that the Maasai were eating mostly animal foods. They were drinking milk and blood from their cattle. They weren't eating a lot of vegetables. They ate some grains, which they fermented. But they ate nose to tail. Their cattle were their prizes. Their cattle were cherished possessions, if you would like to call it that. And so their diet was very rich in animal foods, including all of the things that we're going to talk about in just a moment. The Pygmies, on the other hand, ate a diet with far less animal input. They ate more vegetables and grains, always fermented or sprouted, or we now even talk about soaking and sprouting as well as fermenting. They also ate small game. I believe they ate some insects. The Australian Aborigines ate even things like rats and grubs. But the point is that these people were all consuming a fair amount of animal products, and it wasn't like they were harvesting an animal, be it deer or anything else. They weren't just harvesting the flesh meat. They prized the organ meats and the fats. And so here, it's not showing. Oh, it's not showing because I need to put it there. Okay. There we go. Whether Dr. Price was in Africa, Polynesia, Alaska, or anywhere else, people revered the animal foods. They understood that the organ meat and the fat and the bones were essential to their health. They didn't have science to back it up, but they, when possible, wherever possible, they ate seafood, which tends to be very rich in zinc and wonderful fat-soluble vitamins. The animals that they might harvest in the wild, they would harvest the adrenal glands, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, all of it. And flesh meat is almost like incidental. They did eat the flesh meat, of course. The whole animal was used. But the point is that they understood they needed the whole animal in order to be healthy and to produce healthy children. And that was important to them. Some of them even had sacred foods. For instance, in the Polynesian islands, people preparing for marriage would be given special seafoods like lobster that were extra rich in zinc and fat. So even though these people lacked the understanding of science and what was actually in the food, they knew that they needed these foods in their diet in order to be healthy. They also ate not quick bread, not white bread, and not Wonder Bread, but just like the Swiss that he first visited, people, if they ate bread or if they ate grain, they were fermenting it or they were allowing it to sprout. One thing that's interesting to note is that prior to the mid to late 1800s, grains were harvested with a scythe, gathered into bundles, and weathered in the field before the heads of grain were actually parted from the stalks. This accomplished a couple of things. Well, one major thing, and that is that the motion or the effects of the warmth of the sun, the moisture from the dew, and just simply time break down anti-nutrients that are harmful to our guts. and also that block mineral absorption. Now, fermenting, as in sourdough bread, accomplishes the same thing. Soaking oatmeal overnight with a little whey accomplishes the same thing. So people were not just harvesting grain, storing them in silos that grew mold, and then grinding them, removing the most important parts of those grains, and then making a quick yeast bread. No, they were fermenting their breads, and then they were soaking and sprouting everything else. And then vegetables were often dried or fermented. Now, this isn't something that Dr. Price talked as much about, but we now know that fermenting vegetables, which is a traditional, long-standing, centuries-old means of preserving vegetables and fruits, think chutneys. These are old methods of preserving, but they also tremendously enhance both the nutritional value of the food that we're eating, but also the fermented foods contain enzymes and microbes. The enzymes help to break down proteins and fats in our gut, and the microbes help to keep a healthy balance of microbes that help us with our overall bodily health as well as mental health, because all of the body's health begins in the gut, and that includes brain. So this is important also for growing children, for all of us. Fermented foods are a key part of what we teach. Very important. Dr. Price also found the importance of eating traditional fats. Now, these are so vilified today, with the exception of olive oil. Since the Ansel Keys study came out in, I believe, 1958, saturated fat has just been vilified nonstop. And yet, while people have cut back on eating saturated fats, they've replaced traditional fats like butter and lard with manufactured seed oils. And we're not going to go deeply into this. You can look back at the show that we did a few weeks ago with Sally Fallon Morell, where we talk about the problems of industrialized seed oils. Dr. Price found people, though, consuming lard, tallow, butter, ghee, olive oil, and coconut oil. It's my understanding, actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anyone knows, but I believe that coconut oil is the most widely used fat for cooking anywhere in the world. I read that somewhere a long time ago, and I haven't ever gone back to fact check that, but I understand why that would be. However, lard, butter, and olive oil are just as common, or almost as common, around the world. And they contain nutrients, different nutrients, each of them, but all contain nutrients that our bodies need to be healthy and strong. And they provide energy that our bodies need to function properly, including exactly the kind of energy that our hearts require and our internal organs require for fuel. And yet, these are the fats that we're told constantly to avoid or minimize and replace them with heart-healthy oils. I don't recommend that at all. Again, go back and listen to the show that we did a few weeks ago with Sally Fallon Morell to learn more about that. But these fats are of critical importance, partly because some of them contain particular nutrients that are needed to absorb and utilize minerals that are in our diet. These fats actually build and enhance our health, and they're super, super important. And then another thing that Dr. Price discovered, and that we know from archaeology throughout the world, is that anywhere in the world where people could, they raised dairy animals, whether it be obviously things like cows, goats, sheep, donkeys, mares, camels, water buffalo. I guess that, and there are more, reindeer in Scandinavia, But wherever people could, they did raise animals for milk as well as for meat. And all of these animals, of course, were raised naturally, what we now call regeneratively. Regenerative farming really can save the world. And in the dairy industry, regenerative farming is totally where we should be looking, because animals that are consuming their natural diet, like the cattle in the Lochenstall Valley of Switzerland, when they're consuming their traditional native diet, the animals are very healthy, and the milk contains nutrients that is just wonderful for our health. Now, most cultures would take this milk, as the Swiss did, and make it into cultured and fermented foods that would carry them through the winter months, as well as fortify them through the rest of the year. And the milk contained a wide variety of nutrients that the body needs, including fat-soluble vitamins, including true vitamin A and vitamin D. It's very difficult for humans to convert precursors to vitamin A to true vitamin A, but ruminant animals do it beautifully. And that's one reason why we should be consuming our dairy products from animals that are fed naturally, and milk that is not pasteurized. Now, we do also have a podcast about that, and you can look through our YouTube channel and godsgoodtable.com and find more about that. But dairy was really an important, a critical food for many of these cultures, like the Maasai, who consumed a lot of milk every single day. They even took their cattle with them when they would go to battle another tribe. So very, very important, but also the dairy needs to be raw, not pasteurized, because even low temperature vat pasteurizing destroys much of the nutrient content. And when you ultra pasteurize it, you're drinking totally dead milk. You can't absorb most of the nutrients from that. As a matter of fact, your body wants to reject it. Ultra pasteurized milk is really a bad food to be consuming. But fresh raw milk and cultured raw milk are wonderful foods. I even advocate, of course, for making baby formula. We have an article on our website about raw milk baby formula. We take it from the Weston A Price Foundation, from the recipes on that website. And again, we're talking about the research of Dr. Price. And I do want to talk about the foundation that bears his name. But just for the moment, let's think about the importance of consuming really all of our foods, exactly the foods that God wants us to eat, wants us to consume, rather than commercial, devitalized, fake foods. We need real food. So what I found interesting in my study of Dr. Price's research over the years was that every single principle was rooted in Scripture. And so I could see that the majority of the problems that Americans and the world over experiences now are directly related to our change in diet for a completely devitalized, processed diet that's causing multitudes of problems. If you are over the age of 50 or 60, I would ask you to look back on your childhood and consider, how did your grandparents die? What were your aunts and uncles' health like? Did you see a lot of people with cancer, heart disease, diabetes? Because I know that I didn't. I was born in 1963, and there was just not a whole lot of, there wasn't widespread disease, but people's health was definitely on the decrease. There were a few people in my young life that I saw, just a few, who had cancer. There were some people who were obese, who were eating a lot of processed foods and beginning to have problems like type 2 diabetes. There were people who just had a host of issues, and the mental health issues were beginning to come into play as well. But then fast forward to the 1980s, and we're really seeing a marked difference in the health of our nation. There are other factors that play into this too, one which I can't discuss here, but I will discuss otherwise, and it definitely has to do with what we put into our children's bodies directly, that comes from the pharmaceutical industry, which is completely indemnified, I think is the word. They suffer no consequences if there are, or when there are, terrible negative outcomes. I'll just say that. But now, here we are in the early 2000s, and everywhere we look, every family that I know, someone or several family members have really serious issues, really serious health issues. And I believe that this is because people have stopped following God's plan for what we should eat, and even how we should prepare our food, and definitely how we should grow our food. That's all written in the book of Leviticus. And all throughout the Old Testament, we see such clear instruction about how to grow food, what foods we should be consuming, and even in what combinations. Look at the Passover meal, for instance. You've got bitters, which increase your digestive fluids to help you break down the foods. You've got the lamb. You've got the whole animal. The whole animal had to be eaten. That included the organ meats and the fats. That Passover meal was a very nourishing meal. And of course, it has tremendous, hello, Richard, spiritual implications. Richard, he just likes attention. Don't you, Richard? Richard had salmon and tuna this morning for his breakfast, by the way, because our animals also, I believe, should be eating good food, God-given food, not just dry kibble. So 2 more points that I want to make. One is that no matter where you live in the world, just as Dr. Price discovered, every environment has the food that the people living in that environment need. I was reading or watching a documentary last week about an explorer, a Swedish explorer, who explored the Arctic and lived with the people there in extremely harsh conditions. And all they really ate year round, he lived there for a whole year, was fish and seals. The Alaskan Eskimo people that Dr. Price visited, they ate a diet that was 80% saturated fat. They ate seal oil, whale blubber, and they ate the organs. And in the summer months, they harvested wild berries and such. But they really didn't have access to grains, and they didn't have a long enough, or the right environment anyway, to grow vegetables. Their diet was completely animal-based. The Australian Aborigines, now Australia is, of course, a large continent, and the diet would have varied all over the continent. But the people that Dr. Price discovered consumed mostly an animal diet, and that included things that we would just turn our nose up now. But the animal foods contain really all the nutrients that we need to be healthy. I don't believe that we should be on a carnivore diet. I don't believe that we should, at least long term, I don't think that we should ever exclude an entire food group for more than just a short period of time to heal or to cleanse. But some of these people, that was all that they had, were animal foods, and they were the perfect foods for those people in that environment. Wherever you live, outside your back door, there are foods that you can harvest, and there are foods that you can grow, including animal foods. We have everything we need because God provided every nutrient, every food in every condition. But I always like to say, when God created the world in 6 days, he never made a factory. He also never installed a factory farm. This is super important. Please remember that we need to eat the foods that our bodies are designed to eat. We can play around a little bit with various diets for various reasons, but our diet should always consist of real food, unprocessed foods. And we really do need the animal foods, including stock from the bones and marrow from the bones. Oh, I just love that. It should include liver and heart. It should include, I live here on the East Coast in the Mid-Atlantic region, and there is an abundance of food that we can harvest either wild or cultivated. But our food always needs to be from a farm or from the wild, and never, ever from a factory. So I urge you to go back to a really solid traditional diet. I'm going to recommend a couple of resources to learn more. Traditional Nutrition by Ben Hirschberg is a book that I recommend. It is not as hefty as Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. This is the in-depth book if you really want to understand, as I did years ago. Ben Hirschberg's book is a really good overview of that. Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon Morell is a wonderful book that explains all of the principles of healthy eating. And then one other resource I'm going to mention is that a late contemporary of Dr. Price was Dr. Francis Pottenger. This is a really interesting book. It's about cats, right? Well, it is about cats, but really what it's about is nutrition in general. Cats have a digestive system fairly similar, quite similar to humans, as do pigs. And because their life cycles are so much shorter than ours, Francis Pottenger realized that he could do experiments with groups of cats, and he could see the multi-generational effects of diet. So he separated his cats into different groups. Some were given completely natural diets. Dr. Price experimented, as did Pottenger, with cooked versus raw foods. And then Pottenger looked at cats that he fed just kibble, cats that got raw milk, and then cats that got some kibble and some of each. And anyway, he was able to look at several generations, and what he discovered was exactly validating Dr. Price's research. When you give a cat or a human their proper diet, their natural diet, they have vibrant health. They have a vastly increased resistance to disease. They're able to heal faster and better and more fully from wounds. And they live a longer, healthier life outside of accidents and that kind of thing. What Dr. Pottenger also saw, however, was that you could take, in this case, cats whose litters generation after generation decreased in vitality when consuming processed dead food or a mixture. Eventually, the kibble diet, the cats couldn't even reproduce, and it only took them a few generations to get to that point. And then the group that was consuming a mixed diet, they were able to go on longer, but see, they had problems like blindness, decreased litter sizes, and other issues, just like people do. But Dr. Pottenger was also able to reverse at least the middle group's health simply by returning those cats to their native diet, their natural diet. Look at this cat. Isn't he healthy and strong? Oh, yeah. He lived out in the wild for his first few months, and I assume he was eating birds and mice and that kind of thing, although I was feeding him to tame him. But Dr. Pottinger's research is really fascinating, and this is not a fat, difficult to read book. I really encourage you, if you're interested at all, to pick up Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. We have links in the show notes for all of that. And I'm going to even mention my friend Sophie's book, which I need to do a review for, The Nourishing Asian Kitchen. This, like the Bordeaux Kitchen, these are just two examples of wonderful traditional foods that built and maintained solid health with people in completely different cultures. Although Vietnam, Sophia is Vietnamese, and the Vietnamese were colonized by the French. And so there is a bit of a French influence there, but still utilizing the foods that were available in Vietnam. And that's just a wonderful book. But the Bordeaux Kitchen and other books like that, I can't think actually off the top of my head of others that are a specific cuisine from a specific region that approach food from a traditional perspective. But anyway, these are fantastic books. I would encourage you to read more. And also, my work for many years with the Weston A Price Foundation is really what led me to the point where I realized that I wanted to help God's people to understand that God gives us direction, not only in how we become Christians, how we should live, how we should worship, and all of the stuff that people argue about. And oftentimes it's valid. We should discuss doctrine. But don't overlook, please, that God also gave us instruction in health and healing, in growing food, in preparing food. He gave us all of that instruction because he knew it was important in order for us to be strong and to carry on with the work that God needs us to do. We have to have strong and healthy bodies. We need to have sound minds, and we cannot have that eating a processed, devitalized diet. So check out the Weston A Price Foundation. Membership to the foundation is only $40 a year. It's so affordable. And that gives you the journals. I would show you journals, but the kitty cat Richard here, he knocked stuff on top of the journals. If I pick them up now, there's going to be a loud drop. So I won't do that. But the Wise Traditions Journal is a wonderful publication. It goes out to all of the members quarterly, and it covers some really amazing, interesting, and important topics relating to health, healing, nutrition, and regenerative farming. There are other benefits as well to joining the foundation, but start out just by perusing the website, if you will. There are many articles. There are even a few by me. You can look my name up and you'll find a few that I've written. But there are far, far more that are so important, written by doctors, practitioners, and people just like you and I. So you can check out the foundation, but I definitely urge you to go back to eating the way God intended us to eat for our health and wellness, and understand, as with the work of Dr. Weston A. Price, that what we eat has an absolute, clear, and direct impact upon our physical health and our mental health as well. I'm going to leave you with that for now. Next week, we're going to introduce Dr. Patty Powers, who will be speaking at our God-Given Food as Medicine event happening April 19th through 21st in Wirtz, Virginia, on the Melvin's Farm to Fork property, the farm that produces wonderful, good raw milk and other foods. So again, that's April 19th through 21st. The price is very reasonable. There are many easily accessible places to stay, and we hope you can come join us. But we'll interview Dr. Patty Powers next week. I think we're going to probably talk about hormones probably about hormones. She also talks about detoxification and some other things, but I think we'll probably delve into hormones. Please leave us a note to tell us what you'd like to hear about, or is there a particular person you'd like us to interview? Just let us know, because we're here for you. And with that, I will sign off for now. Hey, Richard. Say bye, Richard. It's time to play. It's time to play. All right. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Oh, you're going to get vocal now.